Right, hello there, and a somewhat bewildered welcome to our countdown of the top 10 politicians in the world. Yes, you heard that correctly. We're about to embark on a journey, a televisual safari, if you will, through the dense, often thorny and occasionally baffling jungle of global leadership as we peer with a mixture of trepidation and morbid curiosity into the year 2025. Now, top is a wonderfully elastic word, isn't it? Like a politician's promise, it can mean almost anything. Are these the best, the most effective, or perhaps just the ones who've managed to cling to the greasy pole of power with the most ferocious tenacity, or whose past actions are still sending ripples, nay, tsunamis across our collective futures? Let's be clear, compiling any top 10 list is an exercise in subjective madness, like trying to rank your favorite existential dreads. But for the sake of, well, something, we're doing it. These leaders, whether you adore them, despise them, or simply wish they'd take up competitive Tuvan throat singing instead of, governing, have undeniably made significant impacts on their countries and the world stage. Their decisions, their rhetoric, their frankly astonishing haircuts in some cases have shaped and will continue to shape the geopolitical landscape as we hurtle, possibly screaming, towards the mid-decade point. So buckle up or don't, I'm not your dad, but perhaps pour yourself a stiff drink, you might need it. We're about to dive headfirst into the murky waters of international politics, armed with nothing but a script, some carefully selected video clips, and the faint, desperate hope that by understanding these figures a little better, we might understand our increasingly bewildering world, or at the very least, get a few bewildered laughs out of it. Let's begin this entirely scientific and not at all arbitrary countdown. All right, kicking off our list, and perhaps controversially given she's technically ex-chancellor, is Angela Merkel. Yes, Mutti herself. Now, you might be thinking, John, or rather Kay, she's not ruling anything in 2025. She's probably enjoying a well-deserved retirement, possibly finally figuring out how to work her toaster without causing a minor international incident. And you'd be right, mostly. But her shadow, her legacy, the sheer Merkelness of her 16-year tenure looms so large over Germany, and by extension the European Union, that her influence is still a palpable force shaping the political climate of 2025. She's like the political equivalent of that one song you can't get out of your head, even years later. Think about it. For over a decade and a half, Merkel was the de facto captain of Team Europe, navigating the Eurozone crisis, the migrant crisis, Brexit. Oh, we'll get to Brexit, don't you worry. And a parade of increasingly unhinged world leaders. Her style was often described as pragmatic, understated, even boring. And in a world that increasingly resembles a reality TV show directed by a caffeinated squirrel, boring started to look an awful lot like reassuringly competent. Her steady hand, her commitment to multilateralism, her legendary patience. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're the benchmarks against which her successors, and indeed other European leaders, are still being measured in 2025. Her departure left a power vacuum in Europe, a sort of where's Angela game that leaders across the continent are still, somewhat awkwardly, trying to win. The Franco-German engine, so crucial to the EU's momentum, sputtered for a bit, didn't it? Germany itself, under new leadership, is still finding its footing, trying to balance its economic interests with a more assertive foreign policy stance, something Merkel often approached with the cautiousness of a bomb disposal expert. It's a testament to her impact that even in her absence, discussions about European unity, about Germany's role in the world, are still framed by her long, sensible, and occasionally exasperated tenure. Of course, her legacy isn't without its critics. Some argue her pragmatism sometimes tipped into indecisiveness, that her reliance on Russian energy, for example, looks catastrophically naive in hindsight. And those are valid points. No leader is perfect, not even the ones who manage to wear the same style of jacket in a dozen different colors, a feat of sartorial consistency that frankly deserves its own Nobel Prize. But the stability she represented, the sheer predictability in a deeply unpredictable world, is something many found themselves, and still find themselves, yearning for as 2025 unfolds with its own fresh batch of geopolitical anxieties. So, while she may not be at the negotiation table, Angela Merkel's influence reverberates. Her policies, her approach, the questions her leadership raised, they're all still part of the DNA of European politics. She set a tone, a standard, and whether that standard is being met, exceeded, or spectacularly fumbled is a drama still playing out. She's the political ghost at the banquet, silently judging everyone's table manners, and occasionally making them miss the days when a sensible blazer was the most exciting thing on the agenda. A true titan whose impact is undeniable. Next up, we cross the pond to the land of the free, the home of the brave, and the place where political discourse increasingly resembles a comments section on fire. The United States of America and its current occupant of the Oval Office, President Joe Biden, or as he's affectionately known, Uncle Joe, a nickname that conjures images of folksy wisdom, aviator sunglasses, and perhaps a tendency to fall asleep after a large meal. Heading into 2025, Biden's presidency is, to put it mildly, a roller coaster that occasionally gets stuck upside down while the safety inspector is on a very long lunch break. His mission, as stated, was to restore normalcy in the soul of America after the, let's call it, eventful Trump years. A noble goal, certainly, like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube after it's been stomped on by a herd of bison. And to his credit, he's signed some significant legislation, infrastructure bills, climate initiatives, things that sound terribly grown up and responsible, but the political landscape he inherited and continues to navigate is a minefield of partisan division, culture wars that make the actual civil war look like a polite disagreement over tea, and an economy that seems to have the mood swings of a particularly dramatic teenager. Internationally, Biden has sought to repair alliances frayed by his predecessor, rejoining international agreements and generally trying to convince the world that America isn't entirely run by people who communicate exclusively through angry tweets. Yet challenges abound. The ongoing war in Ukraine, the complex relationship with China, more on that behemoth later, and the persistent question of America's reliability as a global partner. It's like being the new manager of a band whose lead singer just trashed every hotel room on the last tour. A lot of apologies and reassurances are required, and not everyone is convinced. Domestically, the story is no less complicated. Inflation, immigration, gun violence. These are not small potatoes, folks. These are giant mutant potatoes from a science fiction film, and they're threatening to crush the entire potato salad of American society. Biden's approval ratings have often resembled a rather disappointing EKG reading, reflecting a nation deeply polarized and, frankly, exhausted. His age is a constant topic of discussion, which, while perhaps impolite, is not entirely irrelevant when the job involves, running the most powerful nation on earth and not, say, competitive napping. So, as 2025 unfolds, Joe Biden finds himself steering the ship of state through incredibly choppy waters with half the crew actively trying to drill holes in the hull. His policies aim for a more stable, equitable America and a more cooperative world order, but the headwinds are fierce. Whether he can successfully navigate these challenges and truly heal the divisions he set out to mend remains one of the biggest open questions. It's a monumental task, and one that requires more than just a love for ice cream and a well-meaning anecdote. The world watches with bated breath and a slightly concerned expression. All right, let's journey eastward to the vibrant, chaotic and utterly fascinating nation of India and its dominant political figure, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, Modi is a leader who inspires fervent devotion in his supporters and equally fervent criticism from his detractors. There's very little middle ground, much like trying to find a lukewarm cup of chai in India. It's either scalding hot or disappointingly tepid. As we look at his influence heading into 2025, it's clear he has profoundly reshaped India's domestic landscape and its posture on the global stage. His brand of nationalist politics, often intertwined with Hindu identity, has been a powerful force. Under Modi, India has seen significant economic reforms and a massive push for infrastructure development, new highways, digital connectivity, and a Make in India initiative aimed at boosting manufacturing. These are ambitious goals for a country with over 1 billion people and a dizzying array of complexities. His supporters point to rising economic indicators, increased foreign investment and a sense of national pride. They see him as a strong, decisive leader who is finally unlocking India's vast potential. And indeed, India's growing economy makes it an increasingly crucial player in global affairs, a counterweight in Asia, and a massive market everyone wants a piece of. However, Modi's tenure has also been marked by significant social and political controversies. Critics raise serious concerns about democratic backsliding, the shrinking space for dissent, pressure on the media, and the rise of religious nationalism that has at times marginalized minority communities, particularly Muslims. Policies like the Citizenship Amendment Act and the revocation of Article 370 in Kashmir have been deeply divisive, both domestically and internationally. It's a classic strongman playbook. Centralize power, project an image of unshakable resolve, and rally a fervent base, often at the expense of pluralistic values. On the world stage, Modi has pursued a multi-alignment strategy, engaging with diverse partners from the US and Europe to Russia and countries in the global south. He's a prominent voice in forums like the G20 and BRICS, positioning India as a leader of the developing world. His personal charisma and energetic diplomacy, often involving those famous Modi hugs, have certainly raised India's profile. Yet this balancing act becomes increasingly difficult in a polarized world where choosing sides or not choosing sides comes with significant geopolitical consequences. It's like trying to dance with multiple partners at once without tripping over everyone's feet. So as 2025 continues, Narendra Modi remains a hugely influential and deeply polarizing figure. His government's focus on development and national pride resonates with many, but concerns about India's democratic ethos and social cohesion persist. The world's largest democracy is at a crossroads, and the direction it takes under his leadership will have profound implications, not just for its 1.4 billion citizens, but for the entire global order. He's a leader who demands attention, and whether you see him as a visionary or a threat, his impact is simply too large to ignore. Chapter 4, Xi Jinping, the chairman's infinite playlist, and you're all on it. And now we turn our gaze to the People's Republic of China and its paramount leader, Xi Jinping. If global politics were a video game, Xi would be the player who's not only reached the highest level, but is now actively rewriting the game's code to ensure he stays there indefinitely. His consolidation of power is unprecedented in modern Chinese history, effectively making him chairman of everything. As 2025 rolls on, his influence isn't just about China. It's about a fundamental reshaping of the global order, whether the rest of the world likes it or not. Which, spoiler alert, many increasingly do not. Under Xi, China has pursued what he calls the Chinese dream, a vision of national rejuvenation that involves immense economic development, technological supremacy, and a much more assertive, some would say, aggressive foreign policy. The Belt and Road Initiative, a colossal global infrastructure project, is a prime example, extending China's economic and political tendrils across continents. It's like a global game of Risk, but instead of little plastic soldiers, China is using ports, railways, and 5G networks, and a lot of debt, which is a pretty effective way to make friends, or at least very indebted acquaintances. Domestically, Xi's rule has been characterized by an intense focus on party loyalty, ideological conformity, and a crackdown on any perceived dissent. The situation in Xinjiang with the Uyghur population, the erosion of freedoms in Hong Kong, and the pervasive surveillance state, these are not minor blemishes. They are defining features of his tenure. It's a system that prioritizes stability and control above all else, often at a steep human cost. The social credit system is perhaps the most dystopian manifestation of this, a world where jaywalking could literally affect your ability to get a loan. Fun? Internationally, China under Xi has adopted a wolf warrior diplomacy, a far cry from Deng Xiaoping's hide your strength, bide your time approach. Chinese diplomats are now often combative, fiercely defending national interests and pushing back hard against any criticism. This has led to increased tensions with many Western countries, particularly the United States. Over issues ranging from trade and technology to human rights and Taiwan, it's less diplomacy and more international shouting match, and it's making global cooperation on critical issues like climate change incredibly difficult. So as we navigate 2025, Xi Jinping stands as arguably the most powerful individual on the planet, leading a nation that is both an economic powerhouse and an authoritarian state, posing a significant challenge to the existing liberal international order. His long-term vision for China's global dominance is clear, and the implications are vast and complex. Understanding Xi and the trajectory he has set for China is not just important, it's absolutely critical for anyone trying to make sense of the 21st century. He's not just on this list. In many ways, he's redefining what it means to be a ruling politician. Chapter 5, Emmanuel Macron Jupiter on a wire. Trying not to look down next, we hop over to France, a country known for its exquisite cheese, its revolutionary spirit, and its current president, Emmanuel Macron. Macron. The man who swept into power like a political wunderkind, promising to modernize France and reinvigorate the European Union. He often projects an air of intellectual superiority, a sort of philosopher-king vibe, occasionally referring to his own presidential style as Jupiterian, which, for those not up on their Roman mythology, means like the king of the gods. No pressure then, Manu. As 2025 progresses, his presidency continues to be a fascinating blend of ambitious reforms, European statesmanship, and moments where he seems one stiff breeze away from a full-blown Gallic shrug of existential despair. Domestically, Macron has pushed through some deeply unpopular reforms, particularly concerning pensions and labour laws. This has predictably led to massive protests and strikes because if there's one thing the French love more than a perfectly flaky croissant, it's a good old-fashioned street demonstration. It's practically a national sport. He argues these reforms are essential for France's long-term economic health, but convincing a nation that famously enjoys its leisure time to work longer is, shall we say, an uphill battle. It's like trying to sell a salad to a lion. A very articulate, well-dressed lion, but a lion nonetheless. On the European stage, Macron has been a vocal advocate for strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe needs to be more self-reliant, less dependent on the United States for its security and foreign policy. With Merkel's departure, he clearly sees an opportunity to become the EU's leading voice, proposing grand visions for a more integrated and powerful Europe. He's the guy at the EU summit who always has a 10-point plan written on a napkin. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just makes everyone else feel a bit inadequate. His relationship with Germany's new leadership is crucial here, as the Franco-German motor is still the EU's primary engine, even if it occasionally needs a jump-start. However, Macron's ambitions often collide with the messy realities of both French domestic politics and the consensus-driven nature of the EU. He can come across as aloof or arrogant, which doesn't always play well with voters or his European counterparts. There's a sense that he's always trying to punch above France's weight, a sort of Napoleonic echo in a world that's moved on from grand empires. Yet his intellectual energy and his willingness to tackle big, uncomfortable questions are undeniable. He genuinely seems to believe in the European project, even when it looks like a particularly frustrating game of 27-dimensional chess. So, in 2025, Emmanuel Macron remains a key, if sometimes perplexing, figure. He's a leader with a grand vision for both his country and his continent, constantly walking a tightrope between bold reform and public backlash, between European idealism and national interests. Whether his Jupiterian ambitions can translate into lasting change, or if he'll just end up as a very eloquent footnote in the history of good intentions, is still very much up for debate. But you can't deny he makes European politics a lot more interesting and occasionally deeply theatrical. Chapter 6. Boris Johnson, the ghost of Brexit, past, present and future, unfortunately. Oh, Boris, where does one even begin with Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson? A man whose political career often resembled a particularly chaotic episode of a British sitcom, only with far more serious real-world consequences. Now, like Merkel, he's not currently Prime Minister as we look at 2025, having departed Downing Street in a flurry of scandals and resignations that surprised absolutely no one who'd been paying attention. But the colossal continent-shifting decision he championed, Brexit, continues to define Britain's place in the world and cast a very long, very complicated shadow over 2025. His impact is less about current rule and more about the enduring mess he helped create. Johnson's rise to power was fueled by a potent cocktail of charm for some, bombast and a relentless optimism that often seemed entirely disconnected from reality. He promised a global Britain, unshackled from the bureaucratic constraints of the European Union, ready to forge new trade deals and reclaim its sovereignty. The slogan, "Get Brexit Done," was undeniably effective, even if the done part has proven to be a rather nebulous and ongoing process, like trying to nail jelly to a wall. A very expensive, very frustrating wall. The reality of post-Brexit Britain in 2025 is, shall we say, a mixed bag. or to be less diplomatic, a rather lumpy, awkwardly shaped bag that smells faintly of regret. While supporters point to newfound regulatory freedom, the economic impacts have been a subject of fierce debate, with many sectors reporting significant challenges, from labour shortages to increased trade friction. The Northern Ireland Protocol, a particularly thorny part of the Brexit deal, remains a persistent headache, threatening both political stability in the region and relations with the EU. It's the gift that keeps on giving, if the gift is a recurring migraine. Johnson's premiership itself was a whirlwind of gaffes, scandals. Partygate, Wallpapergate, Pinchergate, so many gates it was like living in a badly designed stately home. And policy U-turns. His leadership style was often described as chaotic, relying on improvisation and a blustering self-confidence that could, on occasion, be entertaining, but was frequently alarming when applied to matters of state. He was the political equivalent of a toddler given control of a JCB digger, occasionally amusing, mostly terrifying, and guaranteed to leave a significant amount of wreckage in his wake. So, while Boris Johnson may now be a backbencher, a newspaper columnist, or possibly attempting to build a zip line across the Atlantic, his legacy is inextricably linked to the UK's current trajectory. The decisions made during his tenure, particularly regarding Brexit, are still shaping Britain's economy, its society, and its international relationships in 2025. He's a stark reminder that personality and political ambition, when untethered from responsibility and foresight, can have profound and lasting consequences. The UK is still picking up the pieces, and Boris's fingerprints are all over them. Canada. The land of maple syrup, politeness, and a leader who often seems like he stepped directly out of a progressive focus group's dream, Justin Trudeau. With his youthful looks, his earnest pronouncements on social justice, and his penchant for fashionable socks, Trudeau burst onto the global stage as a beacon of liberal hope. As we look at his leadership heading into 2025, the story is a bit more complicated. The shine has, perhaps inevitably, worn off a little, revealing the tough realities of governing even a country as ostensibly nice as Canada. It turns out being woke doesn't automatically solve all your problems. Shocking, I know. Trudeau's platform has always been built on progressive ideals, gender equality. His first cabinet was 50% women, a move that made headlines worldwide. Reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, action on climate change, and a welcoming stance on immigration. These are all laudable goals, and on some fronts, his government has made genuine progress. Canada remains a relatively open and tolerant society, a stark contrast to some of its global peers. He's the guy who will always say the right thing, even if the follow-through is sometimes a bit delayed, like waiting for a Canadian winter to end. However, his tenure hasn't been without its stumbles and scandals. The SNC-Lavalin affair, where his office was accused of pressuring the Attorney General, raised serious questions about ethics and the rule of law. There have been controversies over blackface photos from his youth, leading to multiple apologies and a tarnishing of his carefully cultivated image. It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned leaders can have skeletons in their closets, or in Trudeau's case, perhaps just some very questionable costume choices. It's hard to be a moral paragon when your past keeps photobombing your present. Economically, Canada under Trudeau has faced challenges common to many Western nations: inflation, housing affordability crises, particularly in major cities like Vancouver and Toronto, where buying a house requires selling several internal organs, and the ongoing transition away from a resource-based economy. Balancing environmental commitments with the economic realities of a country with significant oil and gas reserves is a perpetual tightrope walk. It's like trying to hug a porcupine. You want to be gentle, but you're probably going to get pricked. His carbon tax, while environmentally sound in principle, has also been a source of significant political opposition. So, in 2025, Justin Trudeau continues to lead Canada with his signature blend of progressive rhetoric and pragmatic governance. Though the pragmatism often seems to be winning out over the more idealistic promises, he's still a prominent voice for liberal values on the international stage, but the domestic challenges are mounting. Is he the transformative leader many hoped he would be, or a more conventional politician wrapped in a more appealing package? The jury is still out, but one thing's for sure. He'll probably apologise for something again soon, and he'll look very sincere doing it. That's just the Canadian way, eh? Just the Canadian way. Chapter 8, Jacinda Ardern, the empathy empress who said, "Nah, I'm good." Now let's head down under, way down under, to New Zealand and talk about Jacinda Ardern. Another leader who, as of 2025, is no longer in office, having famously stepped down citing burnout, declaring she no longer had enough in the tank. And honestly, in the often brutal, soul-crushing world of politics, that level of self-awareness and honesty is so rare, it's practically a superpower. Her leadership style, characterized by empathy, compassion, and a remarkable ability to connect with people on a human level, made her a global icon, especially during times of crisis. Her influence, much like Merkel's, is about the standard she set. Ardern's handling of the Christchurch mosque shootings in 2019 was a masterclass in compassionate leadership. Her swift denunciation of terrorism, her embrace of the Muslim community, and her decisive action on gun control resonated globally. She showed that strength doesn't have to mean machismo. It can mean empathy, unity, and a firm resolve to do the right thing. Similarly, her government's initial response to the COVID-19 pandemic with its go hard, go early strategy was widely praised, even if the prolonged border closures eventually took their toll. She made "Be kind" a national mantra, which compared to some political slogans is refreshingly decent. Her focus on well-being, not just economic indicators, was another hallmark of her premiership. The well-being budget aimed to prioritize mental health, child poverty, and environmental sustainability. These are complex, long-term challenges, and while progress was not always as rapid as some hoped, the intent was clear: to build a more caring and equitable society. She was a progressive leader who genuinely seemed to care about, progress and people, which again is not always a given in this line of work. Of course, her tenure wasn't without its domestic critics. Housing affordability remained a massive issue in New Zealand, a problem that proved stubbornly difficult to solve. There were criticisms about the speed of policy implementation and the economic impacts of some of her government's decisions. And like any leader, she faced the daily grind of political opposition and media scrutiny. The "enough in the tank" comment was a stark admission of the personal toll that high office takes, particularly for a leader who led with such emotional investment. It's exhausting trying to be the world's moral compass. So as we look at 2025, Jacinda Ardern's legacy is less about specific policies still in effect and more about the she led. She demonstrated that a different kind of leadership is possible, one rooted in empathy, kindness, and authenticity. In a world increasingly dominated by strongmen and polarizing figures, her approach was a breath of fresh air, even if that air eventually became a bit too thin for her to breathe politically. Her influence is in the questions she made us ask. What if more leaders led with compassion? What if being kind wasn't just a slogan, but a genuine political strategy? Her impact is a challenge to the old ways of doing politics. Chapter 9. Vladimir Putin, still crazy and heavily armed after all these years. And now we arrive at a name synonymous with autocratic rule, geopolitical disruption, and a distinct lack of fondness for shirtless horseback riding critics, Vladimir Putin. For over 2 decades, this former KGB agent has dominated Russian politics, systematically dismantling democratic institutions, silencing dissent, and projecting an image of Russian power that often seems wildly disproportionate to its actual economic or demographic standing. As 2025 unfolds, his most defining act, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, continues to cast a dark and bloody shadow over the entire globe, making him not just a ruler but a global pariah to many. Putin's long tenure has been characterized by a relentless consolidation of power. Opposition figures are jailed, exiled, or worse. The media is largely state-controlled, spewing a relentless stream of propaganda that paints Russia as a besieged fortress, valiantly resisting a decadent and aggressive West. It's a narrative straight out of a Cold War thriller, only it's happening right now and the stakes are terrifyingly real. He has cultivated an image of a strong, decisive leader, the only one capable of restoring Russia's greatness and protecting it from perceived enemies, both foreign and domestic. It's a classic dictator's playbook, and he plays it with chilling proficiency. The invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 was a catastrophic miscalculation that shattered decades of relative peace in Europe, triggered a massive humanitarian crisis, and led to unprecedented international sanctions against Russia. It also revealed the brutality of Putin's regime and its disregard for international law and human life. For Putin, this war is seemingly an existential struggle, a bid to redraw the map of Europe and reassert Russian dominance over its near abroad. It's a horrifying gamble, and the entire world is feeling the consequences, from energy price shocks to food shortages. Internationally, Putin has sought to undermine Western alliances like NATO and the EU, using disinformation, cyber attacks and energy politics as weapons. He has cultivated relationships with other autocratic regimes, forming a sort of axis of the aggrieved against the liberal democratic order. His actions have ironically often had the opposite effect, strengthening NATO unity and galvanizing Western resolve. But the damage he has inflicted and continues to inflict is immense. He's like a geopolitical arsonist who keeps trying to burn down the neighborhood and then complains about the smell of smoke. So, in 2025, Vladimir Putin remains a deeply destabilizing force in the world. His grip on power within Russia appears, for now, secure, though the long-term consequences of the Ukraine war are still unfolding. He represents a direct challenge to the post-Cold War international system, and his actions have forced a fundamental reassessment of global security. Understanding Putin's motivations and his regime's capabilities is no longer just an academic exercise. It's a matter of urgent global concern. He's a reminder that tyranny is not a relic of the past, but a very present and very dangerous threat. Chapter 10. Scott Morrison. From Scomo the Daggy Dad to Where'd He Go? And finally, rounding out our top 10, we head back down under, this time to Australia, to discuss Scott Morrison, or Scomo as he was often known. Like a few others on this list, his prime ministership concluded before 2025, but his tenure left a distinct mark on Australian politics and its international standing, particularly regarding climate change and relations with regional powers. Morrison cultivated an image as an everyday Daggy Dad suburban Aussie, a marketing masterstroke that sometimes obscured a shrewd and deeply conservative political operator. His impact is felt in the political debates and policy directions Australia is still grappling with. Morrison's government was often characterised by its staunch support for the fossil fuel industry, making Australia something of an international outlier, if not a pariah, on climate action. This stance led to significant criticism both at home and abroad, especially as Australia faced increasingly severe bushfires, floods and other climate-related disasters. It was a position that seemed increasingly untenable in a world waking up to the climate emergency, like insisting on selling ice creams in the middle of a volcanic eruption. "How good is coal?" he famously quipped, a line that will likely follow him into the history books, and not in a good way. Economically, his government navigated the COVID-19 pandemic with massive stimulus spending, which, while cushioning the immediate blow, contributed to subsequent inflationary pressures and national debt. On the foreign policy front, Morrison oversaw a significant souring of relations with China, Australia's largest trading partner, and a strengthening of security ties with the United States and the United Kingdom through the AUKUS Pact. This pivot reflected a broader geopolitical shift, but also created new economic and diplomatic challenges for Australia in its own backyard. It was a bold move, but one with complex and long-lasting ramifications. One of the most bizarre and telling episodes of his leadership only came to light after he left office: the secret self-appointment to multiple ministerial portfolios. This unprecedented move, undertaken without the knowledge of most of his cabinet or the public, raised serious questions about transparency, accountability, and the functioning of Australian democracy. It was the sort of thing you'd expect in a banana republic, not a supposedly stable Western democracy. It was less Daggy Dad and more slightly unhinged control freak. So in 2025, while Scott Morrison is no longer leading Australia, his legacy continues to shape the nation's political discourse. The debates over climate policy, economic management, and Australia's place in a rapidly changing Indo-Pacific region are all in part a response to his time in office. He's a reminder that even leaders who project an image of simple, everyday values can make decisions with profound and far-reaching consequences, and that sometimes the most surprising revelations come out after the curtains have closed on their political careers. Australia is still figuring out its path forward, and Scomo's tenure is a significant, if sometimes awkward, chapter in that ongoing story. And there you have it. Thanks for watching our list of the top 10 politicians in the world, or more accurately, 10 individuals whose actions, past and present, are undeniably shaping the chaotic, bewildering, and occasionally terrifying reality of 2025. I hope you found that illuminating, or at least a mildly diverting way to spend some time before the crushing weight of global events makes you want to build a bunker and communicate exclusively through interpretive dance. We've journeyed from the pragmatic legacy of Merkel to the ongoing sagas of Biden and Xi, and taken detours through the unique political stylings of Modi, Macron, and the ghosts of Johnson and Ardern. It's been a trip. Remember, politics isn't a spectator sport, even though it often feels like one, complete with outlandish costumes, dramatic plot twists, and far too many unforced errors. These individuals, for better or worse, and let's be honest, there's a fair amount of worse in the mix, are making decisions that affect billions of lives. So, staying informed, staying engaged, and occasionally shouting at the television, it's all part of the messy, frustrating, but ultimately vital process of living in a world run by, well, other humans. Flawed, ambitious, and sometimes bafflingly confident humans. If you manage to sit through all of that, congratulations, you have the attention span of a saint. Or perhaps you just really like Kay's voice. Either way, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Or, content that at least tries to be insightful while simultaneously acknowledging the sheer absurdity of it all. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I need to lie down in a dark room for a while and contemplate the future of humanity. Until next time, try not to lose all hope. It's a scarce resource these days.